And here we go. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the All Dolphins podcast for this Friday, April 11th, 2025. Joined today by Chris Perkins from the South Florida Sun Sentinel. How are you, Perk?
I'm doing good, baby. It is Friday, which really doesn't matter, but it's Masters Week, and the draft is 2 weeks away, and hockey is ending, basketball is ending, so we'll get some playoffs soon. We'll get the draft soon. Good time of year. I like it.
Yep. And I'm going to mention this, and I think it might be the last time I'm going to bring it up because I don't want to make it about all my personal life and all that. But today would have been the 70th winning anniversary of my parents.
Oh, wow.
April
Nice.
11th, 1955. As the followers
Wow.
probably know, they passed in December, but
Yep.
today would have been number 70. Still made it to 69, and I don't think my wife and I, who are at 20 now, I don't think we're going to get there, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll
Yeah,
try.
my parents made 61, I believe it
That's
was.
impressive.
So, yeah,
That's
yeah,
impressive.
no, 70s. Yeah, 69 is great, man. Yeah,
So
nice.
I promised last time I'm going to dive into the Dolphins, mom and dad. There we go. All right, Dolphins. Um, Perk, I haven't spoken to you since Monday.
Yeah. Has anything happened since then?
I was about to say, actually, something happened on Monday. We just didn't find out about it until Wednesday.
You're
Um,
right.
okay, so um, as you may or may not be aware, if you're a Dolphin fan, I've caught this podcast or Perk's fine work at the Dolphins deep dive podcast. But Perk has this theory that the Dolphin offense is about two things: Tyreek and the threat of Tyreek.
That's right.
So there's now the Dolphins now know more about the threat of Tyreek, or where do you stand on the situation moving forward?
The Dolphins still have to keep Tyreek on the roster, and here's why I say that: you're not going to get any good trade value for him. His trade value continues to plummet, especially after this most recent incident. And so, really, listen, I think the best case scenario is unrealistic. That you package Tyreek in a draft night trade for Ashton Genty, the Boise State running back, so you can retool on the fly, retool your offense on the fly, but that's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. So, listen, you keep Tyreek around, and you maybe lightning strikes, and he straightens up his act. It's you. I wouldn't count on that, but you just don't have a better alternative. About the only thing you can do is ship Tyreek off and start the bleeding, the financial bleeding, and the next rebuild right now. I don't think anybody has a stomach for that, especially Greer and McDaniel, who need to win. So you bring them back and you hope for the best.
Yeah, yeah, and I had your Sun Sentinel colleague Dave Hyde on as the guest on Wednesday, and it's like it's such a difficult spot the Dolphins are in because um, I'm like I have been with you all along that Dolphins can't trade him because he's their best player. I mean, he's just and it's not. And I don't know that it's that close. He's their best player.
Yep.
Um, but at some point, I mean, we're getting when is enough going to be enough? It's like, and I understand, and we need to state this over and over and over again. No charges were filed, but the
Right.
fact the police was called for quote unquote and like was it an assault in progress? Um, it's problematic when it's somebody who cannot stay out of the news for generally negative reasons. When it's the BS or whatever you want to call it,
Right.
the thing with the 60-meter race or however long it's going to be with Noah Lyles,
Right.
that's whatever it is, whatever. But when you're talking about like the deal with the marina, the deal with the plus size model and the lawsuit, um, it's just
Just yeah,
it's
it's just a
no.
string of things. This is the second time there's been a domestic incident. The police were called to his different residence before with him and his wife. I believe he had flipped a lit cigar in her direction or something along those lines. The house fire. It's just these things are. Tyreek has not been criminally charged in some of these things, and who knows what is his fault and what isn't. That's not the point. The point is, these incidents keep happening. They don't happen to anybody else on the team, and they keep happening with Tyreek.
Yeah.
That to me is the point. It's just there's a lot of smoke, and whether there's fire or not, there's just too much smoke here. It has to end, and I don't see any reason to think that it will end.
No, and that's the thing. And this is where I once, first of all, didn't think it was realistic to imagine he would get traded. That I wasn't necessarily on board for it happening. Now it's like, yeah, I'm not so sure. Now we have reports that are out there that the NFL has requested, the audio of the 911 call, because even though he wasn't charged with anything, what happened could still fall under the personal conduct policy, which, unless I'm massively mistaken, uh, factors in player history. And at some point, I mean, he wasn't suspended for the boat marina incident, but that's something else to tack on top of there. And can I guarantee that he's not going to get suspended for this particular episode? I'm not expecting it, but I don't know that I can guarantee it's not happening. And what you have in Tyreek is a depreciating asset.
Right.
Um,
Hasn't he talked to Goodell before, or am I imagining that?
it's a good question.
I thought he had
I think he may have had like a
phone conversation, or maybe did he go up to New York? I have to look that up. I have to look. It seems like there was a early, maybe in 2022, but I'd have to go back and look it up. And I think maybe I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, the point to me is he is a depreciating asset, and I see no reason to think that these incidents are going to stop. And whether he gets charged or not, and that's kind of to me, that's kind of the big conundrum. That's the problem. Like, what do you do? Because there's probably going to be another incident, and who knows whether charges are filed. Who knows whether law enforcement is going to be involved? But look, we saw this before the Jacksonville game, right? And to the point where you had two teammates involved, one in handcuffs, Calais Campbell, and John Smith stopped by to help out. And then you've got team personnel involved. Drew, head of security, and he just draws all these other people in sometimes, and that's another thing that you worry about. When something happens at the boat marina or at his home, that's one thing, but when Calais Campbell is in handcuffs and John Smith is on the scene and team security has to be involved, well, now you're involving other people, and it becomes an even bigger team issue, not family, team issue. That these are separate things. Be clear, the family stuff and the team stuff. But from a professional standpoint, when the team and players get involved like that, boy, you got to really, really look at the whole scope of everything and wonder how much longer can we continue with Tyreek.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you no longer would be completely shocked if the Dolphins did move on from him, correct?
Not completely, but I would still be shocked. I just don't know from a professional standpoint, how do you recover from that? Like, how are you going to score points? How are you going to have an offense that averages 20 points per game without Tyreek? I just don't see it at this point.
Yeah, and I would caution those who would quickly point out, well, he missed a game against the Jets 2 years ago, and the Dolphins won 30-0, and Jalen Waddle blew up. He had like 142 and the long touchdown. And I would caution everyone that it was one game, number one. The circumstances were pretty good for that, in that the Jets were so bad offensively. What's that got to do with the defense? Well, if you have a team, if you're playing cornerback for the Jets on that day, you look at what happened very early in the game when Zach Sealer and company were pounding. Oh, guess who it was? It was Zach Wilson. They were pounding the crap out of him. If I'm a Jets defensive player at that game, at that time, it's like offense is not scoring. If we're going to win this game, we have to come up with pick six or something like that. We have to make it happen on our own. And guess what? You start taking chances, and you got a speedster like Jalen Waddle going to take advantage of it. So that game certainly should provide some encouragement of what Jalen Waddle could do as a pure wide receiver one. But to say, well, look what he did against the Jets, that's going to be the entire season, I think that's a stretch.
Yeah, and look, I've given you the numbers on Tyreek the last 2 years. The Dolphins are 11-0 the last 2 years when Tyreek has 100 or more yards receiving, 7-16 when he has 99 or fewer. The dude is very important to this offense and to their offensive success.
Yeah.
So, when you're talking about getting rid of Tyreek, remember that 11-0 the last 2 years when he goes over 100 yards, 7-16 when he has 99 or fewer.
Yeah. So, and again, I get the fan frustration. I completely get it, and it's
Yep. It's
e-
one.
even for us, correct, and even for us, it's like, part of me is like, yeah, get him off the team already. Uh, if you're looking at what's best for the Miami Dolphins football team, is the addition by subtraction you would gain from getting rid of the headache and all that worth what you lose tangibly on the field with his catches and how much he opens up everything else for the offense? Yeah, I'm not so sure about that one. Okay, let's move on. Friday was local day for the Miami Dolphins. That's a pre-draft annual ritual where the Dolphins are allowed to bring in players who either played um, at a college in South Florida or played high school in South Florida, including one Mason Taylor, the tight end from LSU, son of Jason Taylor, nephew of Zach Thomas. Again, these do not count against the 30 visits of 30 prospects you're allowed to bring in. Usually it's for medical recheck. Those are brought in. This is going to be my annual word of caution. Just because the Dolphins bring in a player for a visit doesn't mean they're drafting him.
Yeah.
And it doesn't signify it's a better prospect because, again, a lot of those 30 visits, it's not 30, by the way, it's 30 of every team's choice. It's not like they rank them. These are the 30 players we want.
Right.
No, there's
Right.
a 30 players that they want to get another look at. Generally speaking, is they want to recheck something, usually medical. So not quite the same thing. So that's why if you see certain players are going to have very few of those 30 visits because there are no questions about them. Or teams can't draft them. Like Travis Hunter's not going to do a whole lot of 30 visits.
No.
You were about
No.
to.
What do you think in general of the Dolphins acquiring a tight end? I'll tell you what I think about it.
Go
I
ahead.
think that I think the Dolphins definitely need a number three receiver. To me, it doesn't matter whether it's a running back, slot receiver, or a tight end. However, the number three receiver to me is definitely behind cornerback, defensive tackle, safety, and guard. Right. So now when you're talking about if he's the number five person, how good is he going to be? And so, you know, I I just wonder about the names and the tight end chatter that's been kind of out there, and I don't know that any of it has come from a Dolphins source. I think it's mostly draft prognosticators speculating. Now we think maybe the left tackle stuff comes from Dolphins sources about some of the Mel Kiper's what he hears and when he says he thinks that they're going to take a left tackle. Mel Kiper, works with teams. He has
Yeah.
sources, so I give that more credence than the tight end stuff. But I don't think you're going to get a good enough tight end to be a reliable number three receiver. Again, I don't care if it's your number three receiver, the running back, a tight end, or a slot receiver, but I think at this point, you probably get a better player at a different position. Do you have any thoughts on a tight end being and then actually it'll be your number four receiver, right behind Janu?
I have a ton of thoughts on this. No. Uh,
Yeah,
and
I agree. I agree.
dude, because you mentioned like you looking at last year. Okay, Johnu Smith led the team in receptions with 88. Okay,
Yep.
you have Tyreek and Waddle for right
Yep.
now. Okay,
Yep.
and if you're talking
Yep.
about Devon Achane had 78 catches,
Yes.
and he's going to be prolific again, catching passes out
Yep.
of the backfield. It's a luxury pick.
Yeah.
Again, if you're building with 3 or 4 years down the line in mind, uh, and almost overlooking like I don't want to say punting on 2025, but looking more toward an eye to the future. Okay, maybe if you have that kind of convention on Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland, okay. But if you're trying to marry the two, of getting a player who can make an immediate contribution and a bigger impact based on the team's needs right now. Plus, he's going to be good for several years. Yeah, to me, tight end is like way, way down the list. And somebody brought up like preparing to do a mailbag for this weekend. And a couple of the questions, one of them was a very good point, is considering Tyreek's situation and the fact that he very well would be gone after this season when he has no more guaranteed salary, and the Dolphins can chop off $35 million off his salary cap number by dumping him. Would a wide receiver be in consideration for 13 or the second round? I could see that a hell of a lot more than I can tight end because, as you mentioned, to me, it's cornerback, defensive tackle, safety, and guard.
Yep.
Having said that, I'm a little weirded out because all of the betting odds are still for offensive linemen as the number one pick. The NFL.com is doing something AI produced, still have the highest percentage for an offensive lineman in round one. And I'm like, what am I missing that it needs to be defensive tackle or cornerback? What am I missing?
I would say this as far as the betting stuff, and I told somebody this on social media that I think the Dolphins will win 10 games, but I know ESPN Bet or Vegas has 8.5. 8.5 is a good number for Vegas because they need money on both sides. If they set the number at 10, nobody's betting the over. Everybody's betting the under. So perhaps when you look at the offensive line stuff and the betting, that people just hear Dolphins offensive line, their offensive line sucked. They were always complaining about the offensive line. So perhaps for betting purposes, that's why it's offensive line. Perhaps that's been drilled into people's head. But if you're a draft prognosticator like a Kuiper or so, I can't understand you picking an offensive tackle or an offensive lineman in the first round. I don't think that makes any sense for anybody who's informed. Again, for Vegas, it's different. You want to get some money generated, and I think that's what most people hear is offensive line sucks. Dolphins will go offensive line, but boy, for a mock draft, I'm missing something too. I agree. If it's an informed mock draft, I just don't see how you can come to that conclusion.
Thank you, Perk. And piggybacking on the point that you made for those little gambling thing here, the over under basically it's set like you mentioned. The odds makers set it with the goal of getting as much money bet on the over as they do on the under. So that's why. And then if you notice, they'll always do like the with the half too. So yeah, I'm nothing has changed for me. Okay, going back to the local visits. I mentioned Mason Taylor visited with the Dolphins on Thursday. Yeah, and just throwing it out there, we had a story on Miami Dolphins on SI.com about it, that it would be a great story. He would become the second son of a Dolphin draft pick to be drafted by the Dolphins. You know the answer, right, Perk?
Oof. Boy, now I'm going through the Bosas and wow.
Remember, both drafted by the Dolphins, father
Yeah.
and son.
I don't.
How about that? Channing Crowder.
Oh.
Channing Crowder,
Randy and
second round pick in 2005.
Wow.
Randy Crowder, sixth round pick in 1974.
Wow, I wouldn't have gotten that. Nice. I wouldn't have gotten
Nope.
That.
Wow. And for those wondering if it happens that the Dolphins, because to me, again, Mason Taylor right now is looking like, based on everything you hear in the projection, the scuttlebutt and all that, second round pick, maybe with an outside shot of sneaking into the first round. Possibly will be there when the Dolphins pick at 48. To me, that's a luxury pick, even though it's a great story. Mason Taylor being drafted by the Dolphins, which would be 1997, 27 years after his father was. That'd be awesome. It doesn't make sense from a filling need standpoint. Oronde Gadsden second, he would make a lot more sense because he's not looking at until the third day.
Right.
Fifth, sixth round, that neighborhood. And he's got an interesting skill set with his pass catching ability, which resembles that of his father. And if you see highlights, again, I've said this before, YouTube, Oronde Gadsden, one-handed catch either against the Jets or against the Oakland Raiders in the playoff game. Whoa.
Mm.
But that would not be a father and son thing because Oronde Gaston Sr. was not drafted by the Dolphins. In fact, he wasn't
Right.
drafted by anybody because he ran
Yep.
like a 4.8 for a wide receiver. But the dude
Yep.
could catch, and so can his
Yep.
son.
Yep.
He would make a lot more sense than Mason Taylor would. So it's a
Right.
big
I
name.
agree.
You mentioned an interesting one of like Ashton Genty. I know you're a big Ashton Genty fan.
I am.
You would be okay with drafting a running back using draft capital, the equivalent, because Jalen Wright was a 4th-round pick that cost the Dolphins a third to get him. So it'd be a 3rd-round pick, Devon Achane, 3rd-round pick, Jalen Wright, and 1st-round pick, Ashton Genty. You're good with that?
Yeah, and here's why. Ashton Jinsey is a game changer. He is a difference maker. Um, More so than HN, more so than Jalen Wright, more so than Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson, anybody that they've had in the Mike McDaniel era. And he's a guy who could instantly take pressure off of Tua in the passing game, take pressure off the O line, take pressure off Mike McDaniel as a play caller, take pressure off the defense. He helps all around, and he's different. He's just a different type of a guy, and so he can do so much for the team, so much for the offense. Yes, he's the one that I would take. Omarion Hampton, the running back out of North Carolina, is not Ashton Genty. If Genty is there at number 10, I would think about making a move up to get him. I know the Dolphins don't have a lot, but and that would really be because I think Chicago is at 10, right? Dallas is at 12. He's not making it to 13. If he's there at 10, it's a huge shock because Las Vegas probably takes him at 6. But if he's within reach, I think he is good enough that yeah, I would risk my future for the present. Yeah.
Well, okay. A couple of nuggets around the NFL on Friday. Joe Flacco signs a 1-year deal with the Cleveland Browns to go back to them, which for draft purposes, I think would pretty much lock in Travis Hunter as a 2nd pick after Cam Ward. And then Drew Lock signed to go back to the Seattle Seahawks. I guess he's going to back up Sam Darnold. And the reports for Flacco were 1 year, $4 million. And I can't help but think, shouldn't that have been the Dolphins' move when it's? I don't know.
Yep.
Yes,
Yep. Yeah. I think so. I was a big Joe Flacco fan, big Marcus Mariota fan. I'm the fan of a veteran backup quarterback who has won games in this league and preferably has won a playoff game or has been in a playoff game because I think that's what the Dolphins need out of a backup quarterback. You can't half step. I think this is a half step with Zach Wilson. That here's a guy who 25 touchdowns and 23 interceptions, something like that.
Yeah.
He has not shown me that he's got it. And if you don't have it with this veteran team, then you're not what this team needs. I'll just say that.
Okay.
So this team is at the point where it's not growing along with a backup. That was Skylar Thompson in 2022 and 2023. Now you need a guy in there who can move this team. I'm not convinced that Zach Wilson is that guy. I think Joe Flacco would have been much better for that role.
Yeah, I think the
Hey, let me ask you this:
ask me.
Shedeur Sanders, if he's there at number 13, do the Dolphins take him? I don't think so.
I don't think
I
so
don't think
either.
there's any
Again,
way.
no, but because the Dolphins basically locked themselves into Tua for the next 2 years with the contract. For those not aware, he's got $54 million guaranteed next year, along with this year. So, barring obviously unforeseen circumstances with injuries, Tua is going to be the starting quarterback the next 2 years. Yeah, first of all, you're not going to cut him and incur the kind of cap hit that it would create, and the likelihood of benching him. Also, again, if you decided to make that move, this is not me saying it. If the Dolphins were to decide to make that move, that also would not be happening. Calais Campbell had held his introductory press conference with the Arizona Cardinals on Thursday. Didn't really talk about the Dolphins. When he talked about the Dolphins, it was more in connection with the Cardinals, which came as a surprise to a lot of people that he would sign with them.
Mhm.
And he said the idea of going back to Arizona first popped into his head when he saw reports, or no, didn't see reports. Obviously, he would know when he found out that they were one of the teams that called the Dolphins around the trade deadline about making a trade for him. So I guess that made him feel wanted in
Mm-hmm.
wanting to go back. And then he thought back as well to the game against between the Dolphins and the Cardinals at Hard Rock Stadium last year, which Arizona won a last second field goal and said he was impressed by what he saw. And you combine all of those, and he says he's confident that Arizona can make a run. The one unanswered question, which may remain unanswered, I've seen reports, um, and I don't necessarily cast aspersions or doubts on the report,
Mm-hmm.
but I haven't seen it's very totally solid that Campbell had the Dolphins at the third best offer financially to Campbell. Um, because I would say if that's the case, considering what he signed for with Arizona, which is 5.5 mil up to 7.5, Dolphins should have upped it.
I don't think Calais was staying here, and I don't think money was a factor at all.
Mm.
You have the nostalgia of Arizona and the feeling of being wanted. I don't know if they've offered him a front office position after he's done, or community position, or if he wants that. Um, but perhaps that's a factor. I go back to the start of last season when he's in handcuffs on the street, and then the end of last season, I'm out. Who wants to come back to that lunacy? Like, really, who? And in between, there's the Tua concussion, and there's just the disappointment, and the who knows who was showing up late to team meetings. I just think if you're Calais, you're just looking at this going, man, I don't need this anymore. Like, I don't need this anymore. And I might have said it on this show also. I did a story last season on players who exchanged jerseys. And stop me if I did tell this story. And they exchange the jerseys and they get them signed. And Calais was telling me he's got a bunch of them, already framed and stuff. And I said, are they up in your house? And he said, no, I'm waiting until I get my forever home. And I thought, oh, Miami is not your forever home. You probably don't want to play your last season or last two seasons here. You don't plan on settling here. So, I think that, some of that stuff, I'm not sure that the Dolphins really had a chance. And I'm not sure that money was a major factor. I think other things were at work. That's just my thought.
No, if this were around the horn, I'd go like ding 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 ding. Some points for Perk right there.
All
No,
right. I like that.
yeah, very very well done. In fact, that deserves for those who don't like this tough. Come on, there we go. Or
All
actually, no,
right.
even better, we'll do balloons for
There we
Perk.
go. Oh, there we go.
There we go. Okay.
All right. I like it.
Yes, I'm a dork who likes playing with my computer. Uh, what else do I have? Oh, speaking of venerable former Dolphins who have recently moved on, Terron Armstead did an interview with Kay Adams. A couple of interesting nuggets there in terms of his future. Talked about being very interested in doing television work.
Yeah.
I think he'd
Yeah.
be great at it. He's obviously,
Yep.
he's very interesting, and so I think he would do a very good job. Just like Jason
Yep.
McCourty is another guy, is a former Dolphin who I
Right.
think is very, very good. And then the other thing he mentioned is he would like maybe to coach because he said something along the lines of, I have all this wealth of knowledge that I don't want to waste. And then he mentioned Sean Payton hitting him up after the retirement announcement and talking about possibly joining him in Denver. Didn't specify in what capacity, but interesting. If it doesn't pan out with Sean Payton in Denver, I think the Dolphins could do worse than bringing him on in some sort of capacity. It's not like they have an opening for an O-line coach, but it's not where he would start anyway. But it's a guy who can pass along a lot of wisdom.
Yeah, it makes sense. He mentioned at his party that he was coming after our jobs, but,
Oh,
but
okay.
but I didn't worry because he said I don't come cheap, and so I was like, all right,
Oh, yeah,
you're not
forget
coming
that.
my
Yeah, he's
job.
done.
That's network. That's network. You're not coming to the Sun Signal if you don't come cheap. So I'm not worried about that. I will say this, probably the most excited that I've ever seen Terron Armstead was when I asked him about the second step. with offensive linemen. And I said, everybody hears he's got a good first step. What about the second step? And I knew what the second step is for offensive linemen. But he goes into this whole thing of the second step is where you really get your power from when you're an offensive lineman. The first step gets you going, but that second step is where you generate all your power. And then he talked about hand placement and aim points. And he got really, really technical. And I was like, wow, this would be a great column. But then I was like, I don't know that anybody wants to read like the technical aspects of offensive line play and how you get your power from the second step. But he was really, really excited. And that right there told me this guy could coach, because this guy loves passing on knowledge. And how many guys get excited telling you about the technical things of offensive line play? His face lit up, and he really went on this whole speech, and you could tell the excitement that he was sharing some knowledge. So I think Terron would be an excellent coach. He loves sharing knowledge. He's a good teacher. He communicates very well, and he can explain things that, like, he's telling me about the second step, and I'm like, I think I kind of understand this. And so if you can explain it to me, you can probably explain it to guys who actually have football knowledge. So I think Terron would be really fired up to be a coach or a TV analyst.
Yeah, and like I said, he's got a good personality for it. I think he'd be very good. Okay, last thing on our plate here is, as chronicled on Miami Dolphins on SI.com, I want to get his title right, VP of Broadcast Planning for the NFL, Mike North, was on a Buffalo-based podcast this week, basically threw out the idea that the NFL schedule for 2025 is going to be unveiled neighborhood of May 13, 14, 15, which matches up to what happened last year. We still don't know for sure who the Dolphins will play in Spain. Scuttlebutt has been it's going to be Washington. My thing on the Dolphins schedule is I think the national television exposure might dwindle a bit this year after 8-9 with the Tyreek Hill cloud. Any thoughts on the schedule as far as you're concerned?
No, I think it's a good home schedule for the Dolphins. I think having Washington in Madrid would be better than losing a home game to, say, Cincinnati or Buffalo, a team that you really need to be at Hard Rock Stadium to beat. So I'm looking forward to the schedule announcement. I've said that I think the Dolphins ought to win 10 games this year. So yeah, look, you return 8 offensive starters.
The sun is shining behind you, Perk.
I know.
Stadium here.
It is. Happy days are here again at Hard Rock Stadium, baby. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, the schedule announcement should be a joyous time for the Dolphins, because we know who they have at home. So it should be a time for excitement and not a time for dread or a time for, oh man, look at who we have. We'll see who the wintertime games are and where they are, and potential cold weather and all that mess. Who's here in September at 1 o'clock? But it should be a joyous occasion. It should be a time to look and say, all right, the things could go in the Dolphins' favor this year.
Yeah, and personal admission here, I know there are some who poo-poo that day. Like, what's the big deal? You already know who they're playing and where, except for the international games, of course. And to me, sorry, I am like always fascinated by the schedule of finding out, okay, when is it going to be played? And, primetime games and all that, when's the bye, all that stuff. I absolutely love it. That's one of my favorite days of the offseason, I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah. No, mine too, because it's a day where you get some definite answers.
Yes.
Right, as opposed to, I love hot stove league talk, and I love talking about could you trade up for Ashton Jincy and all that, but the schedule release is a little bit more concrete, right? There, are you playing 3 out of 4 on the road, or do you have 3 straight at home, or that kind of stuff. So I do love schedule release day.
No, correct. Because right now there's a lull, because you have like the first wave of free agency is really, really cool when players keep changing teams. And then the draft itself, the 3 days of the draft, and then the signing of rookie free agents. That's also very cool. But then there's a lull of 3-4 weeks of like the endless draft speculation where at some point it's like, okay, how many days now before the draft? So the answer is 13. Okay, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks, Chris Perkins from the South Florida Sun Sentinel. Catch his fine work at sunsentinel.com. The Dolphins. See, because you got too many Dolphins
It is.
Dive podcast. Check your notifications for when that's going to come out. Or do you have a date scheduled for next week already, Perk?
Not yet. Not yet. Check us out on social media. We'll let you know.
Okay. And then, of course, check out this podcast. We'll be back here on Monday, barring a breaking news over the weekend. And as a reminder, the Dolphins Collective with Omar Kelly, T Defense Talk, Dudley Durong, and myself live every Tuesday night. We're going to move it up to 8:30 p.m. starting next week. Catch us there. More importantly, catch right here, All Dolphins Podcast. Please like, subscribe. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.